Life is not a series of random events, nor is your journey a wandering thread in the fabric of time. Every sorrow, every silence, every unanswered prayer is but a note in a greater symphony, a melody still unfolding in the hands of the composer. We often mistake the pauses for abandonment, the storms for rejection, yet even the longest night gives way to dawn. What if the waiting is not a delay, but a divine brushstroke on the masterpiece of your becoming? What if the pain is not punishment, but preparation? The same hands that sculpted the stars are at work in you, shaping, refining, weaving your story into eternity. You are not lost, you are not forgotten, you are simply in the middle of the masterpiece. Trust the process, for God is still writing, and the most breathtaking chapters are yet to come. Life is not a collection of isolated moments scattered like fallen leaves in the wind. It is a masterpiece, a divine symphony composed with infinite care. Every high and low, every note of joy and every chord of sorrow, each has its place in the grand design. The trouble is, we often don't hear the music as it's being written. We feel the tension of the unresolved melody, the weight of the unfinished verse, and we wonder if we've been forgotten. But the composer does not abandon his song. There is a reason for the rests in a symphony, for the silence between the notes. Without them, there would be no rhythm, no shape, no meaning to the melody. And yet, when God allows a pause in our lives, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain closed, we struggle to trust the process. We cry out, "Lord, where are you?" Not realizing that the silence is part of the masterpiece. Think about Joseph, thrown into a pit by his own brothers, left to waste away in a prison cell for a crime he did not commit. Imagine the silence he must have endured, the years of waiting, wondering if the dreams God had given him had been for nothing. But God had not abandoned Joseph. He was composing something greater than Joseph could have ever imagined. When the time was right, the prison door swung open, and the very trials that had once seemed like chains became the key to his destiny. You see, we serve a God who does not waste a single note. Even when we don't understand the melody, he is weaving it into something greater than we can see. The delays, the detours, the disappointments, they are not mistakes. They are movements in a divine symphony still unfolding. Think of the seasons. The tree that stands bare in winter is not dead, it is waiting. The seed buried in the ground is not forgotten, it is growing. The night is not endless, the dawn is already on its way. God is always moving, always working, always bringing his creation toward the fullness of its design. And that includes you. Maybe right now you feel like you're stuck in the silence. Maybe life hasn't turned out the way you thought it would. Maybe you've been waiting for an answer that hasn't come, holding on to a promise that seems farther away than ever. But hear this, God has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned his work in you. He is still composing, still weaving, still writing your story. When we look back one day, we will see that every moment had its place, every sorrow had its purpose, every delay was a preparation, and every silence, every long, aching silence was not a pause in God's plan, but a part of it. So trust the process. Trust the composer, and trust that when the final note sounds, the masterpiece he has written will take your breath away. There are moments in life when heaven seems silent. You pray and no answer comes. You cry out, but the only response is the sound of your own breath in the stillness. You open your Bible, searching for a word, a sign, anything that will tell you God is still there, but the silence lingers. And it's in that silence that doubt creeps in. Has God forgotten me? Has he turned away? Did I miss something? Did I take a wrong turn? We long for a burning bush, for a voice from the heavens, for a miracle that will shatter the quiet and remind us that we are not alone. But what if the silence of God is not his absence, but his work in progress? What if the quiet seasons are not punishment, but preparation? Think of the way a seed grows. It begins in darkness, buried beneath the soil where no one can see it. There's no sign of life at first, only stillness, only waiting. But beneath the surface, something is happening. The roots are stretching, the shell is breaking, and deep within, life is stirring. And then, at just the right time, that first green shoot breaks through the earth, reaching toward the light. That's how God works. The greatest transformations happen in the unseen places, when it seems like nothing is happening, when we feel like we're stuck in the waiting. That's often when God is doing his most important work in us. Think of Moses tending sheep in the wilderness for 40 years before God called him to lead a nation. Think of David, anointed as king but sent back to the fields to wait, to learn, to grow. Think of Jesus himself, silent for 30 years before stepping into his purpose. If God is making you wait, if he seems silent, it's not because he has forgotten you. It's because he is preparing you. We live in a world that moves fast. We want answers now, solutions today, miracles on demand. But God does not operate on our schedule. He is never rushed, never late, never caught off guard. When he is silent, it is not because he is absent. It is because he is working in ways we cannot yet see. Maybe you've been waiting for a door to open. Maybe you've been praying for healing, for restoration, for direction. And it feels like heaven is quiet, but I tell you, God is not finished with you yet. The silence is not the end of the story. It is simply the space between movements in the symphony he is composing. The question is, will you trust him in the quiet? Will you believe that even when you can't see the way forward, he is still leading? One day the silence will break, the doors will open, the season will shift, and when it does, you will see that God was never far away. He was always there, working, shaping, preparing, and in that moment you will understand what felt like silence was actually the sound of a masterpiece being written. Nobody likes pain. Nobody welcomes hardship. When trouble comes knocking at our door, our first instinct is to pray it away, to ask God to remove the burden, to end the suffering. And yet, if we look through the pages of Scripture, if we listen closely to the stories of those who have gone before us, we begin to see something extraordinary. Trials are not roadblocks, they are refinements. Gold is never beautiful in its raw form. It must pass through fire, intense heat that melts away the impurities, leaving behind something pure, something strong, something valuable. Without the fire, gold is just another rock buried in the earth. But in the hands of the refiner, it becomes something precious. And so it is with us. Some of you are walking through the fire right now. You're facing trials that seem unbearable, suffering that feels endless. Maybe you've lost something, your health, your job, your security. Maybe you've lost someone you loved with all your heart. And now you carry the weight of grief like a stone in your chest. And you wonder, why, God? Why this pain? Why this suffering? What good can possibly come from this? But let me tell you, suffering in the hands of God is never wasted. The trials you face are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to refine you. They are shaping you, strengthening you, preparing you for something greater than you can see. Look at Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison. Every step of his journey seemed like a setback, another cruel twist in a story that should have ended in despair. But what looked like destruction was actually preparation. Because when the time came, when God's purpose was revealed, Joseph stood before Pharaoh not as a forgotten prisoner, but as a leader who would save a nation. What others meant for evil, God used for good. Look at Job, a man who lost everything, his family, his wealth, his health. He sat in the ashes of his broken life, crying out to God, asking the questions we all ask in the midst of suffering. And yet, even in his pain, God was working. Even in his loss, God was present. And when the storm passed, Job came out stronger with a deeper understanding of who God truly was. And look at Jesus, beaten, betrayed, nailed to a cross. To those who stood at Calvary that day, it must have seemed like the end of the story. The silence of God must have felt unbearable. But the cross was not the end. The suffering was not the final word, because 3 days later the stone was rolled away, and the greatest triumph the world has ever known was revealed. If you are in the fire right now, if you are walking through the valley, know this: God has not abandoned you. The pain you feel today is not the end of your story. It is a chapter, a refining, a preparation for what is to come. You may not understand it now. You may not see the purpose yet. But one day you will look back and realize that the very thing you thought would break you was the thing that shaped you into who God created you to be. Hold on. Keep the faith. The fire does not destroy. It refines. And when you emerge, you will shine like gold. Nothing in this life happens in isolation. Every moment, every encounter, every chapter of your story is woven into something far greater than what you can see. There are no accidents with God, no wasted seasons, no meaningless detours. Everything is connected, every thread woven by his hand into a design so vast, so intricate, that we cannot yet comprehend its beauty. But in the middle of it, when life feels chaotic, when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are, we struggle to see the pattern. We feel like a single thread lost in a tangled mess, wondering if our story even matters. We see the pain, the disappointments, the missed opportunities, and we think, is this all there is? Is this leading anywhere at all? Yet, if you could step back and see your life the way God sees it, if you could glimpse the grand design, you would realize that nothing has been wasted. The struggles, the waiting, the moments of joy and sorrow alike, they are all pieces of something eternal. Think about the story of Esther, a young Jewish girl taken from her home, placed in a foreign palace, caught in a world of power and politics she never asked to be part of. She could have seen her circumstances as random, unfair, even cruel. But there was a purpose unfolding beyond what she could see. When the time came when her people's survival depended on her courage, she realized she had been placed there for such a time as this. And what about Ruth? A widow, a foreigner, a woman with no security, no clear future. But in the midst of her loss, she chose faithfulness. She walked a path she didn't fully understand. And that path led her straight into the lineage of the Messiah. She wasn't just living her own story. She was part of his story. And you are too. You may feel like your life is small, like the things you do don't make much of a difference. You may wonder if the struggles you face have any meaning. But let me tell you, every moment, every choice, every act of faith is being woven into something far greater than you can imagine. The job you lost, the move you didn't want to make, the relationship that didn't work out. What if these things weren't endings, but transitions? What if they were simply shifts in the story God is writing, rerouting you to something better, something more beautiful? We don't always get to see the full picture in this life. We don't always get the answers we long for. But we can trust that God sees it all, that he is working all things together for a purpose beyond what we can comprehend. Your life is not random. Your pain is not meaningless. Your journey is not separate from the greater whole. You are part of something eternal, something magnificent, something only God could design. So trust him. Trust that every thread, every chapter, every moment is being woven into a story beyond your wildest dreams. And one day, when you stand in his presence and see the masterpiece in its fullness, you will understand your life was never just your own. It was always part of his. Faith is not about having all the answers. It's not about seeing every step before you take it. Faith is walking forward when the path is hidden, trusting the one who leads you, even when you don't understand where he's taking you. We like certainty. We like knowing how things will turn out. When we pray, we want answers now. When we step out, we want to see the road stretched out clearly before us. But that's not how God works. He doesn't hand us a map with every turn marked. He simply says, "Follow me." Think about Abraham. God told him to leave his home, his land, everything familiar, and go to a place that he would show him. Not a place already revealed, not a destination with a clear route. Abraham had to step out before he even knew where he was going. He had to trust that God would guide him along the way, and that's exactly what God asks of us. Some of you are waiting for every detail to make sense before you move. You're waiting for the perfect conditions, for absolute clarity, for God to lay it all out in front of you. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith moves forward in the unknown. Faith says, "God, I don't see the full picture, but I trust you do. I don't understand the plan, but I trust you leading me somewhere good." Look at Peter when Jesus called him out of the boat. The storm was raging, the wind was howling, and yet Jesus said, "Come." And Peter stepped out onto the water, not because the storm had calmed, not because the waves had stilled, but because his eyes were fixed on Jesus. That's what faith looks like. It's stepping forward even when the winds of life are strong. It's moving when you don't have all the answers. It's trusting that the same God who has led you this far will not abandon you now. Maybe right now you feel like you're standing on the edge, afraid to take that next step. Maybe you're waiting for a sign, for reassurance, for certainty. But hear this, faith is not about certainty. Faith is about trust. It's about knowing that even if you can't see the way forward, God does. Even if the path is unclear, He is already ahead of you, making a way. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to see the whole road. You just have to take the next step. And when you do, you will find that God is already there, guiding, leading, preparing the way. So step out, trust the process, trust the journey, and most of all, trust the one who walks before you. There is something deep inside each of us that longs for meaning, for purpose. We want to know that our lives matter, that the things we walk through, both the victories and the struggles, are part of something bigger than ourselves. And yet, so many people live feeling stuck, unsure of where they're going, wondering if they've missed their moment. But let me tell you something. If you are still breathing, God is not finished with you. Your story is still being written. The very things you think disqualify you, your past, your failures, your weaknesses, are often the very things God will use to accomplish His purpose in your life. Look at Moses. He had a calling, but he also had a past. He made mistakes. He ran. He hid. And when God called him from the burning bush, what did Moses say? "Lord, not me. I'm not qualified. I can't speak well. I'm not the right person." But God wasn't looking for someone who had it all together. He was looking for someone willing to trust Him. And that's all God asks of you. Or look at Peter. He walked with Jesus, saw the miracles, heard the teachings, and yet when the moment of testing came, he denied he even knew Him. 3 times. If failure could disqualify someone from being used by God, Peter would have been finished. But God doesn't write people off the way we do. He restores. He redeems. And the very man who once denied Him stood before thousands on the day of Pentecost, boldly proclaiming His name. That's the kind of God we serve. He is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for willing people. People who will say, "Lord, I may not feel ready. I may not have all the answers, but if you say go, I'll go. If you say trust, I'll trust." Some of you are sitting here today thinking that your best days are behind you, that you've made too many mistakes, that life has passed you by. But hear me. If you are still here, if your heart is still beating, then your story is not over. The same God who called Moses from the wilderness, who restored Peter from failure, who turned a young shepherd boy into a king, that same God is still working in you. You may not see it yet. You may not understand how all the pieces fit together, but trust this. God is not finished with you. He never wastes a life, never abandons a story, never stops writing. And one day when you look back, you will see that every moment, every chapter, every trial and triumph was leading you towards something greater than you ever imagined. So don't give up. Don't count yourself out. Your story is still unfolding, and the best is yet to come.